Hello, everyone. It's Toby here from Go Slash Remote with me, and we are doing an interview today with Mickey Orelovich, Senior Learning Designer at the Google School for Leaders and a certified executive coach. At the Google School for Leaders, he coaches executives and facilitates leadership programs. He used to be the head of sales development and the chief storyteller for retail, and has created many powerful narratives to inspire our most important customers. Hi, Mickey. Before we dive into the interview, would you want to tell our audience what your key message is for them?
Yeah, sure. So if there's one thing that you take away from today, my key message is storytelling is the greatest technology that humans have ever created. So while computers organize around data, humans organize around stories. In fact, we're hardwired from birth to make sense of the world through stories. We read stories to our children at night. We don't show them a spreadsheet. And in the knowledge economy, you're only as valuable as your stories. So ideas can change the world, but if you cannot express your idea, then it dies. And stories are the most powerful way for you to express your idea. Stories are the means by which we transfer those ideas to other people. So your ability to package your ideas into story is the one skill set that will make you more valuable in the next decade. So the bottom line, whoever tells the best stories wins.
Wow, that's a very powerful message. Thanks, Mickey. And I'm very excited about exploring this topic and that particular take on storytelling a bit further, specifically in the business context. Before we dive in, can we get a little bit more about you and your experience, specifically maybe with storytelling?
Yeah, sure. So I've had about 20 years of experience in data-driven storytelling, business consulting, and leadership consulting, coaching. And so I've been at Google for about 7 years. As Toby mentioned, I work at the Google School for Leaders as an executive coach, a facilitator, and a designer. So in my current position, I coach executives on storytelling, managing teams, leading change, enhancing performance, and I also design and facilitate leadership development programs like managing at scale, leading in complexity, and things like that. And so beforehand, I was head of sales development in the GBO organization. And so I led a team of storytellers that put together powerful narratives for our sales teams in order to have more empowered and meaningful conversations. So we would design industry narratives, future POVs, $100 million big pitches for our top clients, solving their most complex challenges through powerful storytelling and industry thought leadership. And before Google, I spent about 12 years as the director of global marketing and measurement. And I'm also a certified executive coach and run my own coaching practice.
Wow, right. So you have a wealth of experience that we are all going to benefit from today, and very specific also to the business context. So where does your take come from that in this knowledge economy, your value is very much derived from the stories, how well you're able to tell stories. Where does that idea come
Yeah.
from?
So I think we have the science to prove it. Facts alone, they fall short. And in fact, I think stories are 22 times more memorable than facts. Not to mention that 67% of statistics are made up. So we used to think that we're convinced through logic, but we're not. And we now understand that we're convinced by emotion, and then we rationalize through logic. So there's a couple of things that sort of happen in storytelling from a neuro perspective. One is there's neural coupling. So a story activates parts in the brain that allows the listener to turn the story into their own ideas and their own experiences through this process called neural coupling. There's also this concept called mirroring, where listeners will also begin to mirror the speaker. Mirroring is the behavior in which one person will unconsciously imitate the gesture, the speech pattern, or the attitude of another person. So for example, When you yawn, I would yawn. The other thing that storytelling does is that it releases dopamine into the system when it experiences an emotionally charged event like storytelling. So it's easier to remember with greater accuracy. And so what I like to say is, consider 2 sales pitches. Here's the first one, like the new Pixel 5. It has 4 gigabytes of RAM, 64 gigabytes of storage, and 2.5 gigahertz quad core processor. Want to buy one? Or the second story is, imagine you're on a dream vacation on Safari, and you can take all the pictures on 4G without worrying about backing up your photos. And that's what Pixel can do for you. Want to buy one? So which one would you choose?
I have the Pixel 4 because it lets me connect seamlessly with 4G, obviously.
Yeah, so I think we have strong science to support why storytelling is so powerful. And if you think about a presentation is just a story told with a backdrop of slides. And sort of all types of writing will fall between 2 kind of extreme poles. We have reports, and then we have stories, and presentations kind of fall in the middle. So reports, they provide information, whereas stories provide entertainment. Reports, they will only convey information, whereas stories they'll produce an experience. And reports are static, whereas stories are dynamic. And whereas reports are distributed, stories should be experienced. And the really great presentations move away from reports and much closer to stories. So one emotional and vivid customer story is far more persuasive than a data dump of 85 slides.
So let's dive into that a little bit, because slides and presentations have been a recurring theme in all of the conversations we've had about storytelling and in this series and in this interviews. What is it about creating a story versus building a presentation that makes it so enticing to fall into the trap of front-loading slides and the narrative with a lot of data points, rather than looking for this one story or this one example that will resonate at an emotional level with the audience?
Yeah. Well, it's a lot easier to just pile on a bunch of data points in a slide. So it's easier, it's quicker to just Frankenstein the deck and put together a whole bunch of why you should cares in a deck. And then we go to a client or a customer and we kind of show them how great YouTube is or how great search is, and we bang our chest, and our clients are disconnected from that. So I think the first answer is, it's a lot easier to do it. It's a lot harder to take a step back and really think about the story that you want to tell. It's actually a big culture shift, and a lot of what I did when I was the head of sales development within the sales organization. It's the think, not the ink, as we would always kind of say. And there's, sort of like a really beautiful metaphor for a great talk. And it's a journey that the speaker and the audience take together. And the important thing to remember is that you're not the hero. The audience is the hero. In fact, audiences detest arrogance and self-centeredness. Self-centered people don't connect. So you have to make it about the audience. Kind of to use like a Star Wars analogy, you're not Luke Skywalker, you're Yoda. You're a mentor. And your role as the mentor is to give guidance and insight and confidence and magical gifts. And so the moment you change your stance from being the hero to being the wise storyteller, that will dramatically alter your viewpoint. And you'll come more from a place of humility. Because at the end of the day, empathy lies at the heart of great storytelling. You need to wear the skin of your audience. And that's why storytelling is so powerful.
And what would you advise Googlers? Because anyone who is watching this today or tomorrow when you put it out to the world is likely building a deck or a narrative. In fact, I was just working on one myself before we hopped on this call. What would you advise the listeners to do in order to be able to take that step back and focus on that, the essence of that story?
Yeah. So all presentations are making a sale of some kind. So there are basically 4 basic storylines, or there's 4 basic shapes to stories or ways to frame your stories. And the shape really depends on what you want your audience to do. So the first thing I would say is, well, what do you want to change? Do you want to change the audience's information? Do you want to change the audience's abilities? Do you want to change your audience's actions? Or do you want to change your audience's beliefs? And so the 4 basic storylines are: 1, there's the report. And that just conveys facts. And the report changes the audience's information. You're selling new information and you're appealing to the data. Think about like journalistic reporting, like the who, the what, the when, the where, the why. And that's the most often used in presentations here at Google, and they're the most likely to fail. The second one is the pitch. So the pitch, you're recommending a new action or a new solution. The pitch changes your audience's actions, and you're selling the sale, if you will. And the whole point of the pitch is to get your audience over a hurdle. The third type of storyline or shape, if you will, is the explanation. So the explanation, these are stories of persuasion. And you're trying to change your audience's abilities. You're trying to sell new abilities. And it appeals to the head. And finally, the fourth one is the drama, otherwise known as narrative or fiction or story. And it inspires a new belief or a new way of looking at the world. And these are stories of transformation. With the drama, you're changing their beliefs. You're selling emotion. And the drama appeals to the heart. And because it appeals to the heart, it resonates at the highest level. And dramas or stories or narratives, they're the least often used in presentations, but they're the most likely to succeed. And you're probably, as someone who's putting together a deck or a presentation, you're probably already using some of these patterns, but you just may not be realizing it. But once you can start to understand these patterns, you can then start to use them more intentionally.
And can you just dive into that last example in the business context, right? Because there is a difference, or maybe there isn't, but you can share your point of view on that, between Hamlet and a really convincing product keynote, for example, Steve Jobs keynote, right? They're both dramatic stories in a way, with ups and downs and reveals and emotional hooks. But how do you strike the right kind of tone and balance if you're going to look for that narrative given the business context that you're in?
Yeah. So I think there's parts of the narrative that you can definitely put into a sales pitch or a product pitch. And working within the sales organization for close to 6 years, this was a big part of the role of the SDM, was to actually change the way that we have conversations with our clients, and move from data to stories. And that's the big shift. Clients don't want data, they want stories. And so what I would say to you more specifically is, like, if you think about a story, there's 5 basic components to every story. And this applies to a sales pitch, a product pitch, or a Hamlet story or whatever. There's the character, there's the setting, there's the goal, there's the obstacle, and then there's the resolution. And these 5 components, they can be organized into 3 major acts. There's the beginning, the middle, and the end. And usually, like, there's a lesson at the end of each story. And so kind of like the most simplistic way to describe the structure of a story is situation, complication, resolution. So in the beginning, there's a call to adventure where like the hero will cross the threshold, and your job as a storyteller is to kind of establish the gap between what is and what could be. In this case, if you're doing a sales pitch, your client's the hero. And the gap that you're trying to talk about is where you are today with like your budget or your current product or your current platform and what could be. So you're kind of creating that tension, you're creating that gap. And you're asking your client or you're asking your partner to kind of cross that threshold. And then there's the middle. So in the middle, there's the conflict where the hero kind of encounters obstacles and setbacks. And your job as the storyteller is to kind of create and resolve that tension. So what are some of the objections that you might have if you're trying to introduce a new product or introduce a new solution? And then you get to the very end where the hero emerges transformed. And your job as the storyteller is to sort of like deliver the lesson, if you will. And in this case, it might be, here's all of the benefit that you might receive if you make that shift into a new product, a new program, a new media platform, whatever you want to kind of fill in there. So I think that there are definitely fundamental things within storytelling that you could apply and bring into a conversation in order to get your idea across in a business context. So I think that's probably my main response. There are other things too that you could tease apart. So for example, it's really important to have like a really good emotional analytical balance. So oftentimes, we might go into a presentation and we might just, give 30 pages of data and the audience is going to check out. So what I mean by emotional analytical balance is maybe have 1 or 2 slides of data and then wake up the brain with like a really powerful story or a quick anecdote or a best-in-class example. And then you can kind of go back to presenting some more slides. And then again, light up the brain with a great metaphor. And this way you keep the audience engaged and riveted. So you don't have to follow the entire arc of a story, but you can integrate story into your presentation to turn on more of those like the emotional lights within your audience to get them to be more engaged. So you can sprinkle in story into your presentation to get more engagement, because as we've said before, the neuroscience supports this. We are convinced through emotion and rationalized through our brain. And stories is a way to hotwire emotion.
And so when we go back, because we need to rewind a little bit, you said so many very interesting and very valid things that I think are going to warrant anyone listening rewinding and listening to them again to make sure you get all of the little hints, breadcrumbs that you've dropped on the trail to storytelling. Let's go back to the beginning, right? That is character, the audience, that the person receiving the story and the character through which they're experiencing it. So in writing, in creative writing, for example, when you're crafting a story that through the eyes of a character that the audience cannot vest itself in, readers will lose interest very quickly, right? So there's this very important thing that happens at the beginning of any narrative, at any story, also in a business story, where you need to kind of make the audience understand and believe that they are looking through the world or through the problem you're presenting through the eyes of this character, this hero. How do you do that effectively in the business context? Where do you start?
Yeah. So this is where I think some of the coaching discipline comes into play. And stepping into the conversation with a client or with a customer or with a business partner from a place of curiosity, from a place of listening, from a place of empathy, not going in there from a place of being an expert, which I know so many of us like to do. And when you step into a conversation with an open perspective, a beginner's mindset, if you will, that really creates a connection. The most important thing to do in storytelling and in business, it's all about connecting with the other person. At the end of the day, that's what you're trying to create. And the best way to do that is through empathy. And so in response to your question, I would say, how are you stepping into that conversation? Are you coming from a place of curiosity, of empathy, of compassion, of open-mindedness. Like you're just really fascinated about this other person. You just want to learn more about them. And when you're able to do that, you can really connect with them and you can truly understand what their challenges are. And that kind of brings it back to, I think, oftentimes when we go on a sales pitch, we just kind of will spend the majority of the time kind of talking about all of our products and services and solutions. But we fail to actually take the time to really listen. Less talking, more listening, hearing what the customer's problems are. What are their challenges? And actually getting deeper. Like what's like the level 1, level 2, level 3 challenge? And when you're able to do that, then you're really able to make a connection and you're really able to connect. And that's where you can transform relationships. So I think that's just like a long way of saying it's really all about how you step into the conversation, coming at it from a perspective of curiosity, of empathy, of listening, and really trying to connect with the other human being on the other side of the conversation. And that's why storytelling is so powerful.
So you're touching on something that came up also in the first interview I did with Bijan that also kicked off this entire series, because when we talk about storytelling, we also, almost by default started talking about decks and narratives and presenting.
Yeah.
However, storytelling is also a part of that conversation and that relationship building. So what's your take on helping Googlers, helping the people who are listening to this talk understand that storytelling actually can come back in many different interactions that you're having with their customers?
That's a great question. For me, it's really having a storytelling mindset, like putting on your storytelling filters and lenses to everything. You can see the whole world through story, and there's lots of different examples. In terms of leadership, right? Having and telling a compelling story is the most important thing that you can do as a leader. Whether you're sharing your vision, you're motivating your team, you need to get more resources. So leaders need to figure out what story to tell, remind people where they are on the journey, and keep them focused on the ultimate goal. And we can talk a lot more about that in this COVID environment and being in a virtual workspace. But storytelling is so powerful for leadership. Think about product development. Stories beat priorities any day of the week. It's not enough to have a list of product priorities. How do they fit together? What's the product's story? What are your customers' needs? Their needs are your story. Think about culture. If you want to learn about a culture, listen to the stories that people are saying. If you want to change the culture, change the stories. So many different applications. On sales, we talked about sales. People don't buy goods and services. They buy stories. They buy relationships. I like to use like the metaphor of like a fortune cookie. People don't buy the fortune cookie because they taste good. They buy that for the story inside. So the cookie is the commodity, but the fortune, that's the magic. That's where the real value lies. It's in the hearts and in the minds of people. And even like on a personal note, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking like on love, like on relationships. It's important to have story time for your loved ones. I think oftentimes we kind of just get caught up in the humdrum talk of daily chores and routine tasks, but storytelling time, it can become an invitation to your partner to come into your world and reconnect. Then you can tell stories of the past, the present, the future, memories, challenges, dreams. It's an art form. And the key to mastering it is practice.
These are all, I think, wonderful examples, and I think there's something there for everyone, or multiples there for anyone. You said something before also about the rhythm of the story, which I think is worth addressing also when we look at this virtual working environment that we all find ourselves in. But let's first address this idea of a story rhythm. Why is it so? Why is a story structured? Let's put it in terms that might help people visualize, with an opening, a middle, and a climax and a resolution, right? Why is it not? Let's start at a high. Let's keep it at a high for 3 acts, and let's end on an even bigger high. And then we can all go home and go to sleep. Why are stories structured in that kind of rising line?
Yeah. In fact, I think when I think about story, I kind of think about the shape of story more like in an S-curve.
Mm-hmm.
And I can talk about that in just a moment. But when I think about the shape of story, there's really one universal shape, which it's the S-curve. And most transformations do follow that S-curve. And so sort of like in the beginning of the curve, you have, the character, which we talked about. So you want to understand their world, what's their problem. You really want to invest in your character. Like, what do they want? What do they need? What's at stake? And that kind of sets up the character arc, right? Then once you have the character kind of established, the next thing is the setting. And a setting, it's much more than just a place. It's a situation, it's a moment in time, it has vivid details. And the whole point here is to capture the imagination. So you have the character, you have the setting, and then you have finally the goal, right? So that's all in the beginning. So once you have the character and the setting, it's time to introduce the goal. And for a character, you need 3 things. You need a goal, you need a motivation, and you need a conflict, right? The conflict kind of creates the struggle that creates the engagement. And that's really like the beginning of your story. And then there's the inciting incident. And that kind of moves you from act 1 to act 2, which is the beginning to the middle. And the inciting incident kind of sets the story in motion. It kind of puts thrusts the protagonist into the main action of the story. And that's usually the hook, kind of gets the audience into the story. So think about like Rocky IV, if you saw that movie. Like when Drago kills Apollo in the boxing ring, that forces Rocky to face Drago in Russia. So like that's the inciting incident. And now you're in the middle of the story, and this is the juiciest part. And this is about the obstacles. So the character, you want the character to suffer a lot, face a lot of obstacles. There's conflicts, there's problems, there's risks, there's dangers, there's struggles, and things are getting harder and harder and harder. But all at the same time, the main protagonist is growing more competent. And this is what keeps the brain riveted. And usually then there's like a crisis. Like, so just when it can't get any worse, it gets worse. And that's kind of the climax. And that's where like you're sort of at the top of the S-curve, if you will, and the end of act 2. Then you sort of the hero returns back home, become transformed. There's a moral at the end of the story. There's a learning. So that's really the kind of the shape of the story. And there might be like a surprise ending at the end for the twist, which is always kind of a surprise and delight, something unexpected. But that's really like the universal shape of all stories. And whether it's like a quest or an underdog story, or a boy meets girl story, or a coming of age story, or even in a sales pitch, right? So we talked about sales before. The character, the hero, is the client, or better yet, the client's client. And the setting could be the current business environment. So maybe it's COVID, maybe it's holidays, maybe it's a back to school event. And then the goal is the customer business objective. And then the obstacles, it's all the competition from other retailers, or from Amazon, or from the pandemic. And your role as a storyteller, as Google, is to come in as that wise guide, that mentor. So that kind of, for me, defines the shape of pretty much all stories.
If we go back to where we started, right, where you said, well, we convince through emotion. There there is a reason that these stories have that shape, and you kind of mentioned it there as well. But what's the relationship between the convincing by emotion and the necessity to kind of create that shape of the story, as you're bringing this kind of insight to the audience? Why can you not just go straight to the climax?
So then it goes back to the 4 basic shapes. If you wanted to just go back to the climax, it's not really a drama. Then there's the report, the explanation, the presentation, and then the story. So if you're just giving the information, think about it like an EKG line. It's kind of flat, and your audience is gonna check out. So it's important to create contour and arc and have a passion for storytelling. And it's, again, the metaphor of going on a journey, right? So think about yourself. If you're going on a journey, if you're going on a pilgrimage or an exploration, there's no joy or fun in just arriving at your destination without any of the trials and the tribulations. It's the trials and the tribulations where the learning happens, where the evolution happens. It's the gap between what is and what could be. And it's the space between that creates that connection, that engagement. So that's why stories are the most powerful way to influence and persuade, because you are engaging the heart. You are engaging the senses.
We could talk for a lot longer. I'm very sure. We are coming up on half an hour. Maybe just one brief step into the virtual world that we're working
Sure.
in, and how you see stories as being, and storytelling, the ability to become a better storyteller, to be able to help Googlers and our customers and our business partners actually navigate the challenges ahead. Why do you think storytelling is important there?
Yeah, I think I may have alluded to this before, but as I said, storytelling is really the language of leaders. It's the language of change. And as Googlers, as leaders, we sort of, we sit at the border between now and next, between what is and what could be. And our role as Googlers, as leaders, is to guide travelers through these moments of transformation. And in order to do so, we have to figure out what story to tell. We have to remind people where they are on this journey, and also then keep them focused on the ultimate goal. And there's different emotional stages that happen on that beginning, middle, and end. So in the beginning, there's when you're starting a project or you're starting a journey or whatever, there's a moment of inspiration. So the emotion is around excitement and inspiration. And so you want to speak to that. So when you're inspiring a team or you're inspiring a customer, you want to get folks to believe in that idea. You want them to imagine their future. And also there's a bit of a leap. So there is a moment of decisioning, of choosing, and then your job as a storyteller is to help people cross that threshold. And empathy helps travelers kind of cross that threshold. So that's kind of like the act 1 of it. Then the act 2 is like the trials and the tribulations. This requires moments of bravery, moments of overcoming obstacles. There's the fight, the climb. And I would say that's probably where we are right now. And requires lots of resilience and lots of endurance. And given that we're sort of like right in the middle, or hopefully coming out of the middle of this pandemic, we're still, if you look at the story, where we are in the story, what chapter we're in that middle phase. We're going through those obstacles and those struggles and those tribulations, and the emotion that we're going through, or the skills that we need. It's endurance, it's persistence, it's resilience, it's compassion. And so leaders and Googlers and people need to tell stories about that. Keep them remind folks where they are on this path, and keep them focused on the ultimate goal. And then act 3 is the end. That's where we sort of arrive, if you will. And that's the moment of learning and reflection. So we will get out of this. And we'll be returned to some sort of normalcy. And it's going to be important for us to pause and to reflect and to figure out, like, what did we learn on this journey over the past year or so? So that's why I think storytelling is so powerful, because it kind of, you can find where you are on that S curve, right? And so some folks might be, further along than others. Some folks might just be beginning this. Some folks, the majority, I would say, are kind of in the middle. Maybe some are kind of hitting a climax or a crisis, and some of us actually have come to an acceptance and are reflecting on it. So stories kind of give us the shape of our existence, and that's why I think it's powerful, especially in a virtual environment, because it really does help us connect to each other and figure out what are the stories that we need to tell with one another.
Very, very clear and very wonderful message, I think, for people to help visualize and maybe understand also in their sense making of what's going on. Final question for you, Mickey, is what are your 3 tips in terms of storytelling for Googlers?
I would say at the end of the day, empathy, right? So at the heart of all great storytelling, it's about empathy. It's about wearing the skin of your audience and coming from a place of humility. And so that would be number one, is just to really and deeply empathize with your audience and understand where you fit in your audience's life. So I think that's critical. I would say number two, say no to data and say yes to stories. I know it's a bit of a controversial thing, but what I mean by that is you want to contextualize your data. You want to put your data into a story, and that will land with much greater force. When you're able to, we have tons of data here at Google. We sit on this treasure trove goldmine of data, but it's not until you can contextualize it and put it into the shape of the story that you can really persuade and influence. So I would say no to data, say yes to stories. And that'll help you move away from reports and more towards presentations and stories. And then again, I would say the last one, which we just kind of talked about, is storytelling is the language of leaders. And we're all leaders here at Google. And just think about, what are the stories that you're telling? Find more time to create stories. And the best thing that you could do to become a better storyteller is to practice. It's not something that you can watch in a video or read in a book. You just have to practice, deliberately practice. There are frameworks that you can use, but practice storytelling, with your loved ones, with your friends, with your teammates, with your manager. If there's one message that I would want to impart to Google, is let's build a storytelling culture here. And I think that will transform us as we kind of look to the future.
Well, thank you very much for those 3 tips, Mickey. That's also the end of this interview. Thanks everyone for listening. Stay tuned on Go/Remote with me for more content in the Storyteller series and for all other trainings and best practices related to working from home and working remotely as we all navigate this crisis we're all in. And until we speak again, to all of you, this is Toby saying, stay well, and thank you so much, Mickey, for coming on and sharing all of this wisdom with us.
My pleasure.